What would you think if I told you that there is a region where a woman can marry several brothers, where a girl is worshipped as a living goddess, and where monks travel the globe searching for a child they believe to be the reincarnation of their master? That place exists in one of the most extreme and wild corners of the earth, the Himalayas, the highest and harshest mountain range on the planet. A wall of ice that has forced its peoples to create ways of life so radical that they seem impossible. Unique customs survive here. Families where a woman marries several brothers, villages where men visit women at night without warning, towns where hospitality is so extreme that they share their beds, and sometimes even their wives, with newcomers, or communities where women rule and can choose the man they want each night. But the Himalayas also hold other secrets. Monks who seem to levitate, and others capable of drying wet cloth with the heat of their bodies, temples suspended on cliffs, and humans with superhuman abilities capable of reaching places no one else can. And this is just the beginning. Pay attention and don't miss this new video from Uncensored World, because in a few seconds we're going to delve into one of the most extreme and unknown regions on the planet. Let's get started. The Himalayas are one of the wildest and most extreme regions on the planet, a gigantic wall of rock and ice that crosses countries such as Nepal, Bhutan, India, and China. This region is made up of the highest mountains on Earth, which is why each valley is a world isolated from the rest of the planet. A territory so harsh and difficult that, in many places, human life seems almost a miracle. In the harshest winters, temperatures can drop well below 30 or even 40 degrees below zero. The wind cuts through the skin like a knife, and snow can block the roads for days on end. That is why realities have emerged in these mountains that do not exist anywhere else on the planet. Villages where people communicate by whistling from one mountain to another, towns where no one knows their exact date of birth, and suspension bridges made of living roots that rise hundreds of meters above the void. This reality also means that in summer, thaws and landslides can leave villages completely cut off, as at these altitudes, nature rules and dictates the daily lives of its people. Despite its immensity, the Himalayas have a surprisingly low population density. There are entire mountain ranges without a single house, and others where only a few families survive, having adapted to these heights over centuries. In many places, it takes several days of walking to reach the nearest village, because there are no roads and often not even safe trails. On some routes, people literally risk their lives crossing precipices or frozen rivers, as many villages have no doctor or modern means of communication. It is undoubtedly one of the most difficult inhabited regions on the planet. In this harsh environment, communities are small, resilient, and deeply united. Life is so hard that only those who are born here, who have learned from childhood to live with the cold and isolation, manage to survive. This isolation has shaped unique traditions, customs that exist nowhere else, and that we will learn about on this trip. These mountains are home to people with almost superhuman abilities, animals that can only exist at these altitudes, ancient beliefs about mysterious creatures, and impossible temples that seem to hang in the air. Ways of life have also emerged that are so different from ours that they seem to come from another world. The harsh environment has forced these communities to create family systems very different from those we know. In areas of Nepal, India, Bhutan, and Tibet, there are customs that would seem incredible to a visitor, but which have a deep and practical meaning here. Ensuring that the family survives in a place where everything is scarce and survival is not an option, but a daily necessity. Among these traditions is fraternal polyandry, and I can assure you of one thing. For people like you and me who come from outside, it is hard to believe that this is real, until you understand what it means to live here. And when you understand why it exists, you can't help but want to find out more about these ways of life. Fraternal polyandry means that, in these remote villages, a woman can marry several brothers and become the only wife of all of them. It is a real practice, still present in this region of the Himalayas, and in communities such as the Nyinba of Nepal. With the frozen landscape as a backdrop, This tradition makes a lot of sense. In these mountains, every hand counts, and every person is needed to cope with the cold, the animals, the fields, and the long months of snow. If each brother formed his own family, the land would be divided into increasingly smaller and useless plots. Hence this tradition and solution to this problem, since if all the brothers share a single wife, the family remains united and the property remains intact. In practice, this means that the woman lives with all the brothers, each of whom plays a role within the family. The eldest brother usually makes the most important decisions, while the younger ones provide strength, labor, and support in daily tasks. It is a structure that functions as a single team in which no one is alone. For the woman, living with several husbands ensures that there will always be someone to help her, especially in winter, when villages can be buried in snow. The division of labor prevents the fields, livestock, or house from being neglected, and also protects the family in case of illness or accidents, which are very common at this time of year. For the brothers, this form of marriage also has clear advantages. By sharing a wife, they also share the future of the family. There are no divisions, no conflicts over inheritance, and no idea that each should form a separate household. In a place where people struggle every day to get by, the family is a single unit. You're probably shocked, but the key lies in something that for many is unthinkable. Jealousy is almost non-existent here. The brothers have grown up together, worked side by side, and learned from an early age that the survival of the whole family is essential. That's why, for many women, this type of marriage is seen as a more stable way of life, with more support and much less loneliness. There are some very curious details about this tradition. In some villages, when a brother is too young to marry, the woman simply waits until he reaches the appropriate age to join the marriage. In others, the main couple is formed with the older brother, and the others join when they reach maturity. Everything happens naturally and without drama. And although it is not common in certain places, this form of marriage is connected to another custom that is perhaps even more surprising: extreme hospitality. In isolated regions of Nepal and the Indian Himalayas, some families are willing to offer their home and even their bed to travelers who arrive after a long journey. And there are stories of villages where this hospitality has included, in very specific cases, the company of a woman from the family. Later in this journey, we will go into these details, because as you will see, the purpose of all these customs is not based on whims, but on survival. Every tradition, however strange it may seem to us from the outside, is born of the same reality. Living in one of the coldest, harshest, and loneliest places on the planet. And this is only the beginning. In other areas of the Himalayas, there are even more surprising traditions, realities that challenge everything we believe to be possible, as you are about to discover. Deep within this region lies a country that seems to have come out of a fantasy novel. A kingdom hidden among clouds and mountains that rise as far as the eye can see. That place is Bhutan, one of the most isolated territories on the planet, a small kingdom suspended between frozen valleys and impenetrable forests where customs that the rest of the world can hardly imagine still survive. In these remote villages, there is a tradition as peculiar as it is ancient, known as night hunting or bomena, which in English is known as night hunting. The idea is very simple but also very controversial, since in Bhutan during bomena, at night the young men of the village quietly enter the house of the woman they are interested in and spend time with her without disturbing the sleep of the whole family. There is no scandal, no violence, no surprise. Everyone knows that this is part of community life, as it is a traditional form of courtship that has existed for generations. The origin of this custom is deeply linked to the country's isolation. For centuries, Bhutan had no roads, no means of transportation, and no places where young people could meet freely. Houses were separated by mountains, rivers, and forests, and the only way to court someone was to visit them at night, without waking up the entire household. This is how, in Bhutan, the night became a silent bridge that allowed young people to get closer to the one who could become the love of their life. In some villages, if a young man entered a woman's room and her parents discovered him, this could mean two things. Either the boy was genuinely interested in her, or he had simply been caught at the wrong moment. In both cases, tradition dictated that the family had to decide whether to accept the young man as a future husband or to expel him from the village. Despite how it may sound from the outside, the Bomena is not seen as something shady or hidden. It is part of rural culture, an ancient way of meeting a potential partner in a country where privacy is almost non-existent and where the community has always been more important than the individual. But as this occurs in one of the most isolated countries in the world, this isolation has allowed this tradition to survive to the present day unchanged. In addition, this custom has some very curious nuances. For example, in some valleys, the windows of houses are built in a special way so that young people can enter quietly and without problems. In other places, nighttime encounters are considered part of emotional education, and it is the community itself that monitors, advises, and protects young people during this process. Everything happens with a naturalness that is disconcerting to visitors. Bhutan is also famous for other surprising realities that help explain why night hunting was able to develop here. In many rural villages, the Western concept of dating or courtship does not exist. People meet while working in the fields or during the long winter months, when families gather under one roof to endure the cold. In such a closed country, bonds are formed in a way that is very different from most of us. What is most striking is that this practice is not the only surprising way of organizing intimate life in the Himalayas. Hundreds of miles away across mountains and valleys, there is a society known as the Kingdom of Women, a place where women have power, can choose the man they want to spend the night with, and where marriage does not exist as we understand it. And that is exactly where we are headed now. After discovering Bhutan's night hunt, we now head to the Kingdom of Women, one of the most surprising societies in all of Asia. But first, if you're enjoying this trip, like this video and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue researching every week and bring you stories as fascinating as this one, because at Uncensored World we always go where others don't. Thank you for being on the other side. The Kingdom of Women lives in the remote mountains of Yunnan, on the border between China and Tibet, one of the most magical and solitary regions of the Himalayas, and also of the Earth, where valleys so deep and forests so dense are hidden that they seem like scenes from another world. This ethnic group is known as the Mosuo, and they live around Lugu Lake, an area surrounded by misty mountains, ancient temples, and villages suspended in time. In this region, the mountains rule, and the isolation of this environment has shaped a truly unique way of life. But why are they known as the Kingdom of Women? Because here, unlike almost any other culture in the world, the central figure of the family is the woman. It is they who manage the home, the land, the resources, and the important decisions. The family line is always passed down through the maternal side, and children remain in their mother's home for their entire lives. Men do not move in with their partners. Instead, they live with their sisters, mothers, and nephews. The most surprising thing about this society is surely its relationship system, known as walking marriage. In the Kingdom of Women, instead of getting married and forming a common household, it is the women who choose the man with whom they wish to spend the night, and he visits her house only during those hours. At dawn, the man returns to his own family home. Among the Mosuo, there are no spouses living together, no traditional marriage, and no concept of an exclusive partner as we understand it. But all this is not due to disorder or debauchery, but for a much more logical reason that you are about to discover, which has to do with both their way of life and their survival. In a region of dangerous mountains, harsh winters, and isolated villages, family stability has been built around the figure of the woman. It is she who guarantees the continuity of the home, the unity of the family, and the administration of wealth and land. Thanks to this system, the Mosuo have created a society without divorce, without inheritance disputes, and without divided families. The region where they live is as extraordinary as their culture, because in Yunnan there are temples hanging from cliffs, villages built on impossible terraces, and sacred mountains where tourism almost never reaches and very few people are allowed to approach. It is a geography that has protected their culture for centuries, an extreme territory that has also shaped their genetics, helping them to have a surprising resistance to high altitudes and a longevity well above the average for this region. The reality of the Himalayas has also shaped people and animals that many would consider superhuman, and now we are going to meet them, because in this region, on the highest mountains on the planet, lives a unique people, shaped over centuries by the cold, the altitude, and hard work. The Sherpas. Before understanding how the Sherpas have become one of the peoples closest to what many would call superhuman, you need to know something incredible. Without them, the great feats of the Himalayas would never have happened. The Sherpas live in the highest regions of Nepal, in villages that float among the clouds at over 3,000 meters. There, where most of us could barely breathe, they work, laugh, raise their children, and climb mountains as if they were hills. Their bodies have evolved over centuries, developing larger lungs, more oxygen-efficient blood, and a stamina that seems impossible. And here comes the surprising part. History remembers names like Edmund Hillary and other Western mountaineers who have managed to reach the highest peaks. But what almost no one knows is that no Western mountaineer would have reached even halfway up Everest without a Sherpa guiding their steps. It was and is the Sherpas who opened the routes, carried the equipment, marked the way, and in many cases reached the summit before the expedition members themselves. Many of them say that snow has 3 memories: the one you see, the one you hear, and the one only felt by those born here, a way of explaining why they detect danger before anyone else. Being a Sherpa is not just an identity or belonging to an ethnic group. Being a Sherpa is also a very tough profession, one of the most demanding and dangerous in the world, requiring almost superhuman physical and mental strength. But now comes the part that almost no one knows about. To become a high-altitude guide, a Sherpa must invest between $2,000 and $3,000 just in permits and training. That is one of the reasons why climbing Everest has become such an expensive adventure. Expeditions can cost anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000, depending on the route and the level of support each climber needs. And there is a reason for such a high price. Climbing Everest is not just a matter of walking uphill. It involves moving tons of equipment across unstable glaciers, placing ropes in areas where a mistake means death, and paying for permits that the Nepalese government controls with an iron fist. In addition, each expedition needs porters, extra oxygen, special tents to withstand storms, and a team ready to rescue anyone who cannot withstand the altitude. All of this makes Everest one of the most expensive and dangerous adventures on the planet. Even so, every year, thousands of travelers dream of experiencing this adventure. And all of them, absolutely all of them, depend on the Sherpas. The region where the Sherpas live is as beautiful as it is fierce, as valleys such as Pokhara, one of the most magical places in Nepal, are the gateway to the giants of the Himalayas, Everest, the Annapurnas, and dozens of mountains over 8,000 meters high. And the most surprising thing is that in the midst of this impossible geography, you can sleep for very few dollars in lodgings surrounded by crystal-clear lakes, misty forests, and peaks that seem to touch the sky. It is one of the few places in the world where a backpacker can have breakfast in front of a landscape that, anywhere else, would be worth a fortune. And here's another fascinating detail. For generations, the Sherpas have developed an inexplicable connection with the mountains. They can read the sky as if it were an open book. They know when the ice is going to break, when an avalanche is about to fall, and when the weather will change in a matter of minutes. For them, the mountain is not a place, it is a living being, their teacher and also their home. In this extreme world, it is not only humans who seem to have special powers, as there are also animals that can only live at these altitudes. From the dwarf yak, capable of surviving in places where almost nothing grows, to insects such as the famous Himalayan blue tarantula. These are beings that have developed their own form of extreme resistance. The Sherpas have always lived alongside them. For many, the animals of the Himalayas are not just creatures. They are part of the mountain's identity. The yak, for example, is a traveling companion, a source of food, a messenger, and a symbol of life in an environment where everything struggles to survive. Their strength and endurance rival that of the Sherpas themselves, and without them, many villages would not have survived the winter. This combination of impossible mountains, people who have genetically evolved to live at high altitudes, and animals capable of surviving the most intense cold, makes the Himalayas a natural laboratory unique in the world. It is thanks to a balance that can only arise when nature imposes its rules over centuries. And if all this seems impressive to you, we are only scratching the surface, because higher up, there are temples hanging on cliffs and ancient monasteries, where men live who are capable of controlling their body temperature, drying wet cloths with the heat of their bodies, and reaching levels of concentration that would be impossible for many, to the point that some believe they can levitate. Before we get to what could be the most surprising reality of this trip, the most extreme hospitality in the Himalayas, we need to understand what life is like in these mountains. A world where a girl can be revered as a living goddess and where, according to tradition, a spiritual leader is reborn in a child every new generation. A child who, the monks say, can appear anywhere on the planet, even, who knows, in a family like yours. Because to understand why everything is shared here, even beds, we must first learn about this world of isolated villages, impossible temples, and monks capable of doing things that seem straight out of a legend. As you can see, the Himalayas are not just ice, cold, and solitude. They are also a place where spirituality reaches levels that would be unthinkable elsewhere. And this has a lot to do with this extreme reality and way of life. These mountains are home to monks capable of controlling their bodies in ways that science still cannot explain. Among their most surprising practices is tummo, a Tibetan meditation technique with which they can generate internal heat. During nighttime ceremonies, they sit almost naked in sub-zero temperatures, and yet they manage to dry soaked cloaks with only the heat of their bodies. An act that seems impossible, but has been documented time and time again. Over the centuries, these monks have learned to maintain a stable body temperature, even in conditions where anyone else would suffer from hypothermia. But what is truly baffling is that this mastery of the body is only the beginning. Because now comes one of the most mysterious parts. In nearby villages, stories circulate about monks who, during very advanced meditations, seem to rise a few inches off the ground. This is not science or magic, but oral tradition passed down from generation to generation, showing the extent to which spirituality in these mountains is linked to the impossible. Many of these monks spend months in isolation in small hermitages carved into rock walls. There, surrounded by silence and snow, they perfect ancestral practices that have survived for centuries. And the most striking thing is that these hermitages are only the prelude to what comes next. Temples that defy gravity. On the slopes of the Himalayas, there are monasteries suspended over precipices, built on vertical cliffs where any other building would collapse. The most famous is Taktsang, the Tiger Temple, hanging almost 1,000 meters above the void in Bhutan. According to legend, a Buddhist master flew there riding a tiger, and this is when one understands why this place is considered sacred. Some mountains in the Himalayas are so sacred that no one, absolutely no one, can set foot on them. The best known is Gangkhar Puensum, considered the highest virgin mountain on the planet. For the inhabitants of the area, it is not just a peak, it is a spiritual home that must not be disturbed. That is why no climber has ever scaled it. Its slopes remain untouched, shrouded in clouds, legends, and a respect so deep that even the fame of world mountaineering has failed to break. And it is precisely in this region of ancestral beliefs, in this world where the mountain is a living and sacred being, that we find one of the most surprising traditions of the Himalayas, the existence of a living goddess. This reality occurs in Nepal due to a tradition as enigmatic as it is ancient. The election of the Kumari, a girl who is revered as if divinity dwelled within her. Although it may seem strange, this reality is not due to a symbolic title or a ceremonial figure. Here, thousands of people believe that this girl is truly the real incarnation of the goddess, Taleju, protector of the Kathmandu Valley. To choose her, priests search among hundreds of girls for the one who meets a long list of physical and spiritual signs, attributes that, according to tradition, represent purity, inner strength, and destiny. When they find her, the girl's life changes forever. The Kumari goes to live in the Kumari Gar, a small carved wooden palace in the heart of Kathmandu. There, she hardly ever goes outside, as her presence can only be shown during sacred festivities. And one of the most striking curiosities is that she cannot shed blood, because a simple scratch would immediately end her divine status. That is why she never walks barefoot, or can run or play like other children. The Kumari is protected because she is a goddess. During festivals, thousands of people travel for days just to see her appear for a few seconds at a window. They believe that a single glance from the Kumari can bring good fortune, protection, and blessings. Something that few outsiders know is that when the Kumari reaches adolescence, her time as a goddess comes to an end. There are no grand ceremonies or mass farewells. She simply returns to her normal life, regains her original name, and the sacred cycle begins again. Another girl will be chosen to take her place. An extraordinary tradition, yes, but not as mysterious as the selection of the little llama, whose search follows ancient signs and omens that, for many, belong to another world. In the Himalayas, the sacred is not limited to temples or palaces. It is also hidden in its most remote villages, places so isolated that their daily life seems to come from another time. In some of these villages, in areas of Nepal, India, or Zanskar, there is not a single road, and to reach the nearest village, you have to walk for days, crossing glaciers, cliffs, and rope bridges suspended over rivers that roar like beasts, turning each day into a grueling test of survival. The paths are so narrow that one false step can mean a fatal fall, but children, the elderly, and entire families walk them with ease, as if they were everyday trails. In these places, the nearest doctor may be between 3 and 10 days away, and communities depend on medicinal plants, ancestral knowledge, and collaboration among neighbors. Schools, when they exist, are small, freezing wooden buildings where children learn wearing gloves and scarves because the wind blows through the cracks. And it is in these places, where life is hard and isolation is absolute, that the legends arose that gave rise to one of the most incredible traditions of the Himalayas: the search for the child in whom, according to the monks, the spirit of a great teacher is reborn. If you like and are surprised by this story, don't forget to give us a like and tell us what you think. Deep within Tibetan Buddhism lies a belief that spans centuries, kingdoms, and mountains. The idea that the great masters known as lamas never truly die. When their bodies pass away, their spirits, according to tradition, begin a journey that defies all logic. And this is where one of the most mysterious stories of the Himalayas begins: the reincarnation of the Lama. When a Lama dies, silence takes over the monastery. Candles burn for days, monks recite ancient mantras, and everyone waits for signs. That is when a process begins that almost no religion preserves today: the search for the master's new reincarnation. According to their beliefs, an heir is not chosen, he is discovered on earth. For them, being a Lama is not a title, it is a destiny. The highest-ranking monks interpret clues, the direction of the smoke in funeral rituals, words spoken by the Lama before his death, shared dreams, and even climatic phenomena that they consider omens. And here comes the surprising part. Sometimes a simple premonition is enough to set an entire expedition in motion. When they believe they have found a sign, the monks embark on a journey that is more reminiscent of an ancestral pilgrimage than an investigation. They walk for weeks, passing through isolated villages where silence reigns supreme, seemingly endless snow-covered mountain passes, and valleys so remote that almost no one has set foot there in centuries. They knock on humble doors, watch children playing in the dust, and talk to families who don't even know there is a monastery in their honor. Here, the story becomes even more incredible. This search may lead them to a remote village in the Himalayas, or to another continent entirely. One of the most striking tests is the famous selection of objects. Several mixed items are placed in front of the child. Some belonged to the deceased llama, and others did not. They say nothing. They explain nothing. They just watch. And if the child chooses the correct objects, for the monks it is neither magic nor coincidence. It is a revelation. For them, these tests are not games or coincidences. They are revelations, moments when the invisible, according to their tradition, manifests itself through the hands of a child. But what comes next is even more surprising. Because tradition states that the llama can be reborn anywhere on the planet. And this is not theory, it has already happened. As in this story that you are about to hear, which really happened and surprised the whole world. It was at the end of the 20th century when Tibetan monks announced that the reincarnation of a master had appeared in an unexpected place, a Spanish child named Osel Hita Torres. According to the monks, Osel was the reincarnation of Lama Thupten Yeshe, one of the most influential teachers of modern Tibetan Buddhism. It all began when they traveled to Spain following several signs that, according to their tradition, pointed to the west. When they met the child, they performed the test of the objects. They mixed the Lama's belongings with other random items. Osel chose the objects belonging to the deceased master without hesitation. For the monks, there was no doubt. The spirit had been reborn. At just 14 months old, Osel was taken to the Sera monastery in southern India, where he was given the name Tenzin Osel Rinpoche. There, he spent years studying Buddhist philosophy, meditation, and rituals reserved only for the great masters. His story appeared in newspapers around the world and became one of the most talked about cases of reincarnation in modern history. But like other young people recognized as reincarnations, Osel followed his own path. As a teenager, he decided to leave monastic life, study film, and build a different destiny. For Tibetan monks, this was not a problem. Reincarnation, they say, indicates a destiny, but does not oblige one to follow it. And here comes another revelation. His case is not unique. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are dozens of reincarnated lamas, known as tulkus. Each lineage has its own signs, methods, and stories. And incredible as it may sound, some searches have led monks to Europe, America, and other parts of the world, where they investigated children who showed strange memories or recognized objects belonging to dead teachers. Some were confirmed, others were dismissed. But the belief lives on. For these monks, at this very moment, a child may be growing up in some corner of the planet who, without knowing it, carries within them the spirit of a great teacher. And now, before continuing this journey, and discovering the most extreme hospitality of the Himalayas and the villages that communicate by whistling between giant mountains, tell us, would you accept a monk pointing to your child or a member of your family as the reincarnation of a master, even if it meant leaving your home to live in a monastery? Which do you find more difficult to accept? That a woman can marry several brothers? Or that she can choose a different man every night, as the Mosuo do? Do you think life would be easier in a place without jealousy? Pause the video for a moment and leave us your comment. It will be great fun to read your thoughts, and as you know, your opinion is what keeps this channel alive and helps us continue traveling where others cannot go. Thank you for being part of Uncensored World. Life in this region is so extreme that many people don't even celebrate their birthdays. Not because they don't want to, but because most of them don't know their exact date of birth. In many Himalayan villages, there are no official records, no hospitals to record the day and time, and for generations, no one had documents to record these details. That's why in the Himalayas, life is not measured in years, but in winters survived. Every winter is a test. Sub-zero temperatures for weeks, roads blocked by snow, food shortages, and almost total isolation from the rest of the world. For these communities, surviving another winter means staying alive. It means that the family has endured another season of cold, altitude, and loneliness. Life here is so harsh that even the way people communicate has had to adapt to the mountains. In some remote valleys, a whistled language is used, a way of transmitting messages that can travel for miles through the clean Himalayan air. This system is neither a whim nor a curious tradition. It was born out of necessity. In these mountains, a shout does not travel far. The slopes echo chaotically, and often speaking too loudly can trigger an avalanche. Whistling, on the other hand, crosses ravines, bypasses forests, and glides between ridges without risk. Thanks to this unique language, the inhabitants can warn of landslides, coordinate the passage of animals, call for help, communicate births, or even transmit news from one village to another, all without technology and without leaving the safety of where they are. In a world where cell phones barely have a signal, these whistles become a true natural communication network, as ingenious as it is ancient. A form of communication that has a lot to do with what you are about to discover, because it is precisely in these remote villages, deep in this inhospitable region, that a custom emerges that many visitors find impossible to believe. Absolute hospitality. A hospitality so extreme that it needs no name. Everyone in these villages knows what it means. In valleys such as Zanskar, Ladakh, Mustang, or rural areas of Tibet, the arrival of a stranger is a rare event. So rare that weeks, months, or even years can go by without anyone from outside setting foot in the village. The roads are blocked by snow for much of the year, cliffs cut off the routes, and glacial rivers prevent progress. That is why in places like this, a visit from a stranger is a truly extraordinary event. So when someone arrives, the inhabitants offer them the best they have. In these villages, hospitality is not just a matter of politeness. It is a moral obligation, a sacred principle that has allowed communities to survive for centuries. If a traveler appears at dusk, frozen and exhausted, no one can allow them to sleep outside in the cold. Here the rules are clear. Life comes before everything else. That is why they offer the best food, the best fire, and even the best bed, even if it is their own. In some very isolated villages, as documented by anthropologists working in regions of the Indian and Tibetan Himalayas, hospitality could go even further. There are accounts that claim that in times past, and even today in very remote corners, the family offered not only their home, but also the company and care of a woman of the house as a supreme gesture of trust towards the visitor. This was not something romantic or related to desire, but a cultural act that sought to protect the stranger from the cold, integrate them into the community, and make it clear that they posed no threat. According to these chronicles, the company served above all to offer human warmth, keep the tradition of hospitality alive, and strengthen the bonds between people who, in such a dangerous environment, might need each other to survive. Although it may sound strange to many of us, and it would be great to know what you think about this, it is a tradition that deserves to be understood. Because this gesture, incredible as it may seem, has deep roots. In places where isolation is extreme, resources are scarce, and survival depends on cooperation. Sharing everything, including human warmth, was the surest way to make peace with any traveler. A true pact of humanity among frozen mountains. In some villages, the guests slept in the family's main bed. In others, they were given the warmest place in the house, next to the fire that barely survived the winter nights. And in certain villages on ancient trade routes, this type of hospitality also served to strengthen alliances, share stories, and keep the connection between isolated communities alive. Today, this tradition has almost disappeared, but it is still remembered as part of a past where the cold could kill a person in a matter of hours, and helping a stranger was an unwritten law. In a world where almost no one arrives, where maps lose their meaning and snow erases the roads, the extreme hospitality of the Himalayas reminds us of something essential. In unique regions like this, among gigantic mountains and silent frozen valleys, life is only possible if it is shared. On this journey, we have crossed impossible mountains, lost villages, and traditions that challenge everything we thought we knew. But this is only the beginning. In Uncensored World, every week we take you to places where others don't even dare to look. So if you want to continue traveling the world like a true explorer, click on the video on the right and continue the journey with us. Click on it, you'll love it.